Those who learn the Dharma should first understand the fundamental theories. Beginners shouldn't directly read sutras. Why? Number 1. Sutras are the recorded words of the Buddha, spoken to specific individuals and in response to specific questions, rather than systematic theories. You should bear this in mind. Sutras are the Buddha's teachings. He replied to questions that others asked, just like the teachings I give regularly. They are not systematic theories. You can see that my teachings, too, are not very systematic. However, overall, we can sort out systematic theories from the sutras. The Buddha himself wouldn't establish systematic theories. He simply taught what arose from his wisdom, but from the sutras we can sort out systematic theories. Similarly, if you transcribe and compile all my teachings into a book, you can also sort out a system from it. Sutras are the recorded words of the Buddha, spoken to specific individuals and in response to specific questions, rather than systematic theories. A teaching in a sutra is just a part of the entire Buddhist philosophical system. By simply studying one sutra or one teaching, it's difficult for one to grasp the overall structure and essence of the Buddha's teachings. Moreover, one is prone to falling into extremes such as existence, emptiness, permanence, or nothingness. Nowadays, most people who study Buddhism are devoted to a specific sutra and attached to a specific teaching. Consequently, they lose sight of the bigger picture due to their narrow focus and miss the underlying principles due to their attachment to forms. Some talk about emptiness and deny the law of karma. Some emphasize meditation but belittle the cultivation of virtues. Some praise the exoteric school but criticize the esoteric school, and more. The root cause behind this is that their knowledge is not profound and vast enough, which leads them to form biases. Many people simply focus on propagating a specific Dharma and only read certain books. For instance, some of those who engage in the mind-in-mind practice are very attached to their own views. Well, this is only the case for some people, not for everyone. Not only in the domain of the Dharma, but even in the secular world, all biases are related to the limitations of time, space, knowledge, and views. As Nagarjuna said, eradicate all views, which means in order to attain the right view that transcends all views, one needs to let go of all biases. The right view that transcends all views. This statement is very important. Number 2. Some teachings in the sutras are definitive, while others are provisional. Definitive means, number 1, what is said is exactly what is actually referred to. Number 2, they convey universal principles and absolute truths. Provisional means, number 1, what is said is not what is actually referred to. They imply something more or something different. Number 2, They are skillful means that convey relative truths. Moreover, in the esoteric teachings, there are strict measures to ensure confidentiality, known as the 4 methods and the 6 seals. If those who study the Dharma don't understand these special expressions of the sutras, but instead interpret the sutras based on their literal meanings, like ordinary books, they will inevitably encounter obstacles. If you interpret the sutras based on their literal meanings, then the Buddhas of the past, present, and future will be wronged. This is true. Due to the above 2 reasons, if beginners directly read sutras, they will not gain a comprehensive and systematic knowledge. Some people claim that Tibetan Buddhism doesn't emphasize the study of sutras. This is totally a bias. The teachings of Tibetan Buddhism are based on sutras. Any teachings not based on sutras are not recognized. So, how can one say that Tibetan Buddhism doesn't emphasize sutras? However, when studying in the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, we don't start from sutras. Instead, we start with fundamental theories, basic knowledge, and the treatises that expound on the outlines. We don't follow the detours taken by our predecessors, and we don't repeatedly research the issues which already have conclusions. Based on accepting the grand research achievements of past Buddhist masters in an analytical and selective manner, we are developing in a more profound and refined direction, and have achieved unprecedented abundant results. The education system and special learning methods of Tibetan Buddhism have played a significant role in its development. Of course, the author comes from the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. In fact, the Tiantai school of Chinese Buddhism also follows a similar approach, starting with fundamental theories and knowledge, and mastering the research results from treatises that expound on the outlines. In Chinese Buddhism, there are also such schools which have summarized shortcuts through a comprehensive understanding of the Buddha's teachings. Similarly, I have also summarized many shortcuts to help you avoid detours. I have shared many tips and shortcuts. Therefore, it's not necessary for each of you to study the sutras. Even if you wish to study the sutras, you may not be able to do so because you are not a master. The masters have already researched and practiced the sutras. As long as we follow the tips and experiences they have summarized, we can swiftly achieve progress. That's why I rarely talk about sutras, because they were spoken by the Buddha according to the needs and questions of specific individuals, but not systematic theories. To study the Buddha's teachings, we need to learn systematically, starting with fundamental knowledge. Firstly, there is a formal education system. Starting from the 11th century, there were formal Buddhist academies dedicated to studying the 5 great treatises of Tibetan Buddhism. Since the time of Lama Tsongkhapa, such Buddhist academies, large and small, had spread throughout the regions of Tibetan Buddhism. Since the Qing dynasty, the Lama Temple in Beijing had also established a debating institute. Secondly, there are exceptional learning methods. In Tibetan Buddhist academies, it usually takes 15 to 20 years to complete the 5 great treatises and obtain the Geshe degree. From the Buddhist logic class at the beginning to the Vinaya class at the end, we always use the method of setting topics for debate, freely discussing and analysing the various theories, views, definitions and concepts of Buddhism, distinguishing right from wrong, establishing right understanding and refuting wrong views. For each question, the understanding and conclusions must be extremely accurate. Buddhism is a very rational religion. Without mastering the Buddhist logic and Nagarjuna's dialectical logic, which are the keys to unlock the treasury of the Buddha's teachings, it's difficult to delve into it. I often mention the difference between dialectical thinking and logical thinking. Buddhist logic is about logic, but dialectics should be considered a way of thinking rather than logic. Dialectical thinking is a unique and highly rational way of thinking in Buddhism. Only by mastering a dialectical thinking can one thoroughly comprehend the entire Buddhism. If you only understand logic, but don't understand dialectical thinking, you won't understand the sutras. Many people in the world only understand logic without dialectical thinking, so they cannot understand the sutras. The Buddha's teachings are filled with dialectical thinking. Here, the author criticizes by saying, in modern times, influenced by the lack of emphasis for scriptural teachings in the Chan school, most monastics in Chinese Buddhism don't study sutras and treatises, but instead spend their lives chanting the Buddha's names and beating wooden fish. They simply light an oil lamp, strike a bell, and read a sutra such as the Diamond Sutra from morning till night without even knowing what it means, considering this to be the monastic practice. This is really pitiful. So, now we need to establish Buddhism based on right faith and mindfulness. It's difficult for us to persuade everyone. Since Chinese Buddhism has been influenced by many negative factors in the past, it's hard to change some of their mindset now. They have inherited some wrong thoughts since ordination, which can hardly be called spiritual practice. The education they receive from the beginning is completely wrong. Moreover, they continue to pass on these wrong teachings. That's why it is challenging to reform Chinese Buddhism now. Of course, some of them have started to pursue further studies, but it's also difficult for them to break free from this mindset. When studying Buddhism, we must have a sincere and scientific attitude because Buddhism is the truth. We must not hold any emotional or superstitious biases, but instead learn with a pure, sincere, and scientific attitude in order to truly realize the teachings. Our right faith must be built on the foundation of right understanding. Without right understanding, your faith is not right faith, but rather superstition. Lama Tsongkhapa said, if we cannot use logical thinking to prove the correctness and reasonableness of the Buddha and the Dharma, but rely solely on blind faith, it is a severe distortion of the Buddha and the Dharma. In Buddhism, apart from the absolute truth which cannot be inferred through logic, most of the teachings can be inferred through logical reasoning. The commentary on valid cognition uses forward reasoning and backward reasoning to strongly confirm the correctness of the Dharma and the Buddha. First, you should know that the commentary on valid cognition is a treatise on Buddhist logic. Many of the Buddha's teachings, including the 4 Dharma seals such as all phenomena are impermanent and all contaminated things are suffering, are inferred and powerfully demonstrated with the methods of Buddhist logic. Lama Tsongkhapa said, "When debating with non-Buddhists, we should not use the Buddha's teachings as reasons to establish our own views or refute others' views. This is because they don't accept the Buddha's teachings. We can only use the facts which are widely acknowledged as reasons to convince others. Therefore, reasoning is more important than the teachings." If there is no reasoning, how can we prove the correctness of the Dharma and the Buddha? If there is no reasoning, but only blind faith, how can those individuals with great wisdom and potential come to believe in the Buddha and the Dharma? For example, how do you convince a Christian to believe in Buddhism? You need to use reasoning. You can't simply say, "I am learning Buddhism, so it is good," or try to persuade others with your own way without logical reasoning. People won't believe it. So, how should you persuade Christians or followers of other spiritual paths, or heretics? You should use the teachings from their own scriptures to convince them rather than using the Buddha's teachings. If you use the Buddha's teachings, they may not even listen to you. We need to use logical reasoning to clarify their teachings and help them realize that their teachings are not self-consistent or complete. This is reasoning. This is Buddhist logic. If you don't understand Buddhist logic, how can you convince others? It's hard to convince those who lack logical thinking. If you try to explain something to them, you cannot make your point, just like a scholar encountering a soldier. Even if you are right, you cannot make yourself understood. Some people believe that commentaries on the sutras are not reliable and cannot be used for studying Buddhism. They argue that if you really want to learn Buddhism, you must directly start with the sutras. This viewpoint is wrong. Without relying on commentaries, how can you discern the definitive and provisional teachings in the sutras? How can you differentiate them? Why do we need treatises? As we know, there are the sutras, Vinaya and Sastras, treatises. Treatises are the systematic compilations and explanations of the Buddha's teachings by great masters, allowing you to start learning from the basics. Many sutras are not very systematic. Sutras are original records of teachings given in response to specific individuals and questions without a systematic compilation or organization. So, sometimes people may misunderstand my teachings. I might explain things one way today and another way tomorrow. They might have a clear understanding in the beginning and think it's good, but after some time they become confused. Then, after some more time, they start to understand a bit better, and then they become confused again. If you listen to my teachings, you will also have this feeling, right? Monk also has this feeling. This is because my teachings are given in response to specific individuals and questions. when I answer questions, sometimes I just explain one point without covering everything. Sometimes I explain one aspect, sometimes two aspects. Sometimes I may address 3, 4, 5, or even 6 aspects, depending on which aspect you can resonate with. It's impossible to cover everything. How can one possibly cover it all? If I were to cover everything, it would take numerous years. Even for just one question, I would need to speak for numerous years to complete all the teachings of the sutras. That's just how things are. Even the Buddha also used this approach. Every sutra is a prescription that the Buddha gave in response to the circumstances of specific disciples during a certain period of time. The Buddha's teachings are given in response to specific individuals and situations, so one teaching may not necessarily resolve the problems of another person. Each teaching is unique, and there is no fixed teaching. That's why those who study a sutra by themselves will run into problems. The Buddha's teachings can be generally divided into 3 periods. Each teaching is just a part of the overall Buddhist teachings. The Tripitaka, consisting of Sutra, Vinaya, and Abhidharma, along with the 4 classes of Tantra, consisting of Kriya, Karya, Yoga, and Unsurpassable Yoga, are systematically combined together. It is like a machine with many different components that are methodically assembled according to a blueprint in order to effectively function. The relationship between the entirety and parts of the Buddha's teachings, as well as the different roles of each part and its position in the whole, such as whether it is definitive or provisional, whether it conveys the ultimate truth or conventional truth, whether it conveys an implied message or just an explicit message, whether it is an unwavering principle or just a skillful means, whether it is directed towards the internal audience or the general public, whether its primary recipients are beings with dull faculties or bodhisattvas with sharp faculties, and what is explicitly stated and what is indirectly implied. These are beyond the grasp of ordinary beings. If you were to study on your own, how would you do it? How is your spiritual foundation? I think this paragraph is really worth pondering. To correctly grasp the meanings of the Dharma, we need to have profound, precise, vast, and sharp wisdom. Profound means reaching a high level of insight, clearly seeing the nature of reality and emptiness. Precise means being able to precisely differentiate the meanings of the Dharma without error. Vast means having a broad view and extensive knowledge, possessing wisdom that sees the entire picture. Sharp means being able to discern even the slightest differences in the meanings and concepts. In order to develop such profound, precise, vast, and sharp wisdom, we need to study the analytical and reasoning methods of the Buddhist logic and the middle way, cultivating a high level of thinking and analytical skills. Engels said, Buddhists are in the advanced stage of rational thinking. They not only have the logical thinking based on the Buddhist logic, but also dialectical thinking. Other philosophers may not have both of these ways of thinking. They may understand logic, but not dialectics. Very few of them understand dialectical logic. To thoroughly and accurately understand the intricate aspects of the Buddha's teachings, such as the two truths of phenomena and principles, no self in person and no self in phenomena, we need to use reasoning and analysis. Without special training, it is hard to accurately grasp the profound meanings of the Buddha's teachings with primitive ways of thinking. That's why you cannot understand the Buddha's teachings without someone explaining them to you. The Western philosophers, as well as the scholars and philosophers throughout Chinese history, including Confucius, would not have understood the Buddha's teachings if they had not been guided by the Buddha. Even if you are intelligent, without the Buddha's guidance, you cannot comprehend the Buddha's teachings. There have been numerous Western philosophers who, despite their intelligence, haven't figured out a path. For example, Hegel established a huge philosophical system. However, in my perspective, it is just a pile of rubbish. He was very influential in Germany and was considered a prominent philosopher and professor. However, in our eyes, his work is useless. Even intelligence is useless in this context. In Chinese history, there were also many philosophers, but what they realized was just a tiny fraction of the Buddha's wisdom. Although they realized something, compared to the Buddha's teachings, it is merely the tip of the iceberg. They may have had some realizations, but they were very limited. For example, the Analects consists mainly of teachings without analytical thinking. There is no profound truths or rational thinking. Well, perhaps there are some. Confucius didn't elaborate on the way because his disciples wouldn't understand it. Confucius said, "Hearing the way in the morning, and this way can only be understood through rational thinking." Ordinary disciples wouldn't understand it, so he could only provide teachings on behaviors. Confucius's teachings were focused on behaviors. He taught how one should behave without explaining why. Buddhism consists of profound knowledge from a vast field. Without receiving the explanations of sutras and treatises from a Dharma lineage, simply relying on dictionary lookup or blindly stumbling forward like a blind person touching an elephant, one will not achieve any result. Therefore, Tibetan Buddhism not only emphasizes the transmission of meditation practices, but also emphasizes the transmission of the explanation of sutras and treatises. Explaining scriptures without receiving transmission from an authentic lineage will be seen as expressing one's own opinions and not recognized as valid. Please pay close attention to this statement. There is no problem with sutras, but if one attempts to explain the sutras without receiving transmission from an authentic lineage, it will be regarded as their own arbitrary interpretation. This refers to casually explaining the sutras without receiving transmission from an authentic lineage and without the recognition of esteemed lineage masters. If you were to give an arbitrary explanation of the Surangama Sutra to others, it would not be recognized. It's essential to receive transmission from a recognized lineage. They not only emphasize the scriptures, but also emphasize the transmission of explanations. This strict Dharma lineage system plays an important role in preserving the authenticity of the tradition and preventing arbitrary interpretations of the scriptures. Preventing arbitrary interpretations of the scriptures. Unfortunately, this is the situation in China today. Some individuals without authentic lineage transmission merely spend a few years in a Buddhist academy and then start interpreting the sutras arbitrarily. They may talk about one sutra today and another sutra tomorrow, all based on their own understanding. Without spiritual attainment or lineage transmission, they dare to explain the scriptures and misinterpret the Buddha's teachings. As the saying goes, if you interpret the sutras based on their literal meanings, then the Buddhas of the past, present, and future will be wronged. As mentioned earlier, the path to cultivate wisdom involves listening, meditating, and practicing. Extensive listening and learning, proper thinking, and clear discernment, along with repeated meditation practice, are the necessary conditions to nurture profound, precise, vast, and sharp wisdom. The third Gangthang Rinpoche once said, "Randomly reading books can lead to a scattered mind." The books here refers to the sutras. Don't assume that reading sutras will make you wise. Randomly reading sutras can lead to a distracted mind. Individuals who study the Buddha's teachings must pay attention to the following points. Number 1. You should start with the basics and progress step by step. Don't aim too high. I have repeatedly emphasized this, and I hope you can remember these teachings. Number 2. You should start with the fundamental theories. If you don't even understand the 3 realms, as explained in the Summary on the 3 Realms of Existence, then it is totally nonsense to talk about seeking liberation from samsara. If you don't even understand what the 3 realms are, how can you attain liberation from samsara? What kind of samsara are you trying to transcend? Do you think that by transcending the human realm, you have achieved liberation from samsara? Going into the formless realm is not liberation from samsara. It is just escaping from the human realm. Such individuals haven't even figured out what the 3 realms are. Therefore, we should start from learning fundamental theories. If one directly studies the sutras without understanding fundamental knowledge, one will not only go astray, but also fall into the wrong path of interpreting the Buddha's teachings solely based on their literal meanings, and not able to differentiate the 2 truths and 2 meanings. Who among you can understand the sutras? If you directly read the sutras without learning fundamental knowledge, you won't understand them, let alone the more profound sutras and treatises. You won't even understand the basic sutras imparted to those with dull faculties, let alone the more profound scriptures. You will misinterpret the definitive teachings of the Buddha in a heretical way. If you wish to study Vajrayana, it's essential to study Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of mantra. To fully grasp the teachings of the 3 vehicles, the exoteric and esoteric schools, and become an authentic Buddhist scholar, it's essential to have a deep understanding of the aforementioned basic theories. This includes the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment and great treatise on the stages of mantra. Number 3. You should integrate learning and application and emphasize application. It is not easy to correctly understand the meanings of the Buddha's teachings, and it's even harder to integrate them into our thoughts and actions. In other words, our knowledge and action should go hand in hand. We should integrate the Buddha's teachings into our actions. This is even more challenging. Action is more important. Correctly understanding the meanings of the Buddha's teachings and repeatedly meditating on them is more important than simply beating a wooden fish and chanting sutras. Only through actual practice can we understand the Buddha's teachings and strengthen faith. In Vajrayana, there are various special methods to enhance wisdom, memory, and other abilities. By listening, meditating, and practicing, combined with the methods of cultivating wisdom in Vajrayana, the effectiveness of wisdom can be greatly enhanced. This profound, precise, vast, and sharp wisdom serves to deepen our understanding of the Buddha's teachings, strengthen our faith, guide our practice, and eliminate attachments and confusions. I think this teaching is very good. It mentions 4 qualities of wisdom: profound, precise, vast, and sharp, and explains each one in detail. Only the ultimate non-conceptual wisdom doesn't require logical or dialectical reasoning. However, to attain this ultimate wisdom, the qualities of profound, precise, vast, and sharp wisdom mentioned earlier are all essential. Ignorance won't get us there. For some people who claim to study the Chan tradition, what are they even talking about? We need to rectify the situation from the root. In Chinese Buddhism, there are also some great masters who teach the Dharma quite well, and we rejoice and praise them. However, I advise some people not to randomly teach scriptures, as it can harm others. If the listeners have no basic knowledge at all, then providing such teachings to them is harming them.